I continue this lecture on the importance of astrology for understanding women and as a major contribution to gender studies. Gender studies also are a great contribution to the development of astrology. And my position is that in a certain way, gender studies are becoming a central issue, which is the basis of astrology, which is also a basis of history, society. Because since I explained, or since I will explain now, the second part of the cycle of 7 years is connected with what I call the Venusian part, and the Venusian part is connected with the idea of empire. And the idea of empire is a major question in history, because or you build the empire, or on the contrary, you disconstruct and you destroy it. So in both cases, it is very important. We can say that we can resume, we can reduce in a way the history of mankind to the history of empire. Attempt to unify several groups, several people, several countries, or on the contrary, the tendency for each entity, each national entity, to isolate itself, to separate itself from the rest, which is connected with the idea of Martian theory. Severe is something which means also to cut, like a butcher cuts the meat, like a mother cuts the cake between the different guests. When there is only one major point, you don't have to cut. You have one count for it to uncut, to readjust, to rejoin it. Also, okay, so when I say in the first part of my lecture, when I say that there was a time when the program for women to look for men and for each specific man was over, then starts a period where women are unmotivated by that research, and that they are looking more for a sort of superhuman, superman. They abandon in a certain way their private man for a public man. And they converge towards this unique man, and they abandon their respective man in a way. And it has enormous consequences, of course. And in that way, they help the identification of this Superman in a certain way, I suppose. They have this role of unifying mankind by focusing on the same point, on the same target. So there is, as they say in the Ecclesiastes, the Coelet, there is a time for each thing. We cannot, when it's time for Venus, it's not time for Mars, and when it's time for Mars, it's not time for Venus. When I say that in the meaning that I just developed, not in the meaning of war. Mars, for me, is not war. The notion of war is foreign to my system. There is a notion of uniting or separating. By war or not by war, it's a secondary question. Why Mars why Mars is a god and not a goddess, which is an objection you can make. I can't even really answer to that question. I could just say that, for instance, Athena is a warrior also. Minerva, Athena, Diana also is a warrior. She's represented with an arrow. So there is maybe a problem with this question. Mars, which has to be studied more deeply in the different mythological studies, and it's not my point today. Maybe in the future I might bring more light on the question. And on the other hand, Venus is also strangely connected with men, but in fact, as I said, it's also, these supermen are also inspired by women. You know? So it's not that clear to say, well, Venus is for men and Mars is for women. It's not that simple. It's something else. What I want to say is this system which I have discovered and recovered, I would say, this system affords a great progress in consciousness. And this word consciousness is today very, very fashionable. We have to be conscious of what we are, of what happens, what we become, what is at stake, etc. So I will introduce my work in this line of research of consciousness. Certainly. And it is good to be conscious of what is programmed, what is in stake, what happens in the mind of people, in their mode of functioning, and it's very interesting. I think that women are much more determined and programmed than men. Men, in fact, are not programmed at all. They are programmed for working, for thinking, day after day, minute after minute. They don't belong to this sort of calendar. The calendar is something which is imposed to them from outside, you see. And basically, women are making the law in a way. Men are only influenced by what happens in the minds of women. Which doesn't mean that they are not essentially producing. Of course not. It's a well-known fact that the contribution of this is a paradox. In terms of movement, in terms of form, in terms of rhythm, women are very determinant. But in terms of content, in terms of material, of substance, it is a question of men. Who are the greatest composers, the greatest painters, the greatest philosophers, the greatest scientists? They are men. Okay? So there is a sort of paradox here, because in fact men are bringing, in a way, the material, the substance, and women are bringing the structure, the time structure, which will create the framework, the calendar, framework where we men have to evolve, to live. There's a real complementarity here, I must say, which is not exactly the one we know, but I think it's going to be adopted as such very soon. And the history of couple, because in fact the question is the couple also. The couple, men and women, is of course at the center of our study. The couple passes through several stages, several possibilities, several dynamics. And it is good to know when certain things are possible or not possible, and it's also important to understand that there are pauses, that there are intermissions, that there are periods when certain projects have to wait. For instance, a project of unity cannot be developed indefinitely. It has to stop to be interrupted from time to time. And the interruption is precisely this alternance of the two phases. The couple is interrupted by this opening towards infinity and unity. And unity is interrupted by the creation of small entities. This is the Bible story. This has always been existing, I think. And recently someone wrote a book in a group and said, well, some people think that the universe is mathematical. That mathematics not only understanding the universe, but mathematics is the basis of the universe. I wouldn't say that, but I think that a great deal of what happens in this world about mankind has nothing to do with nature. It has to do with techniques, technology, biotechnology. And that's what astrology, all the traditional astrology, has kept in mind. And that's why many astrologers have in mind, even if they are dedicated to false astrology, that is, there is something mathematical in the man, in his behavior. It's not natural. It would be a countersense to say, well, since astrology is connected with the stars, it's natural. No, it's not at all natural. Even if astrologers say that supposedly astrologers discovered the laws of nature in terms of astrology, it's false. Astrology has nothing to do with nature. It uses nature, it instrumentalizes nature, it takes from nature certain elements, certain points, but very seldom in fact. And from that, develops something totally different from nature. So, we are in a certain way, I could say, Vercors, the French novelist from the last century, we are disnatured animals, something like that. We are very far from nature. Like some populations who live near the sea, and they are not at all dedicated to the sea. They turn their back to the sea. Astrologers turn their back to the astronomy. Although, as we know, they tend today to reconcile themselves vainly with astronomy by adopting new planets, etc. I know that. We know all that. You know that. But this doesn't make any difference, basically. It is very superficial and very, very irrelevant. And so we are in front of the machine. And that's why my gender studies are very much connected with my machine studies, with my technique studies. We cannot understand women if we do not understand how machine works. Because machines were made as the image of women in a certain way, to paraphrase the formula, known formula. So we are in a system. It's something which exists. I would give an example. If I study a clock, I study a clock. I'm not going to say, oh, well, I think it's a clock. In fact, it's reality, it's nature. No, it's not a nature. It's a clock. And it has to be studied as such. So it's true that in a certain way you can reduce nature to mathematics in a certain way. But it's going to be always very problematic. But when you study a technique, a technical machine, mechanism, then you are not projecting mathematics on this object. You are just understanding the object as such, which is quite different.